Hello, hello, hello. Happy Friday. I hope everyone's feeling a little bit Christmassy. The Henley lights are being switched on today by Mary Berry. But if you haven't joined us before, myself and Ben have set up from scratch 6, 7, and 8-figure businesses. We're serial entrepreneurs and we like to share the highs and lows and the transparent issues that you uncover in business to hopefully help our listeners not make mistakes that we've made and grow and scale their businesses, maybe bigger and better than ours. So thank you very much for joining. And we've got a huge episode today. And if you're on the podcast, it's the 29th of November, listening to the Property Experts podcast. But without further ado, we'll roll into the agenda and what we have coming up. We'll be starting off with investment opportunities and going into more detail around that. We'll be talking about why would you back-to-back a purchase? So actually, I'll rephrase that. Why would you buy a back-to-back purchase, also known as a sub-sale? So if you've ever heard of this, it's a contract play where you can sell a site on before you even complete, or what I'm talking about is you're the buyer of someone actually doing that. We'll be sharing business banking. We're looking at moving around some of our business banking and what that might look like for a business and why you should maybe steer clear of a few banks and aim towards others. We'll be talking about utilities and the most commonly overlooked costs. I feel utilities just outrageous of late, but we're going into detail about that. There's good news. There's been a completion in Central Suites this week, so we'll be sharing that. And then actually a little bit of a tip on building out Grade 2 listed buildings and how we're phasing the consents and why that would benefit us to deliver. We'll be talking about hoarding going up. We had a huge error on the last one. I don't know if anyone in the last episode spotted it, but it looked small, but it is quite a big error. So we'll be sharing a bit more about that. But yeah, it's all fixed. We'll be talking about XP Survey's Build and Bond event, and biodiversity net gain was our topic of our speaker this week, and I loved it. There was loads of questions flying around, and we'll be sharing about what we learnt and also a little bit more about XP Surveys. I'll be talking about the National Development Summit, and if anyone's got a blast from the past, from I think 2021 was the last one he might have Brendan put on the National Development Summit. But there's a big ask for our listeners. So if you're a female in the property sector, stay tuned because we've got something for you. And then last but not least, show and tell, warts and all.
That's not what we're showing the female.
Yes, yeah. Ben, can you show me your warts? No, it's all about engaging with investors and what you show them and what you don't. And our view is you show them everything, and we'll be sharing why you might want to do that. And then obviously, last but not least, Q&A, and we are obviously live today, so we'd love as many questions as possible. We love a question that we can't answer. I think we've only had one that we haven't been able to answer, but I'll almost say we've got a clean sweep because it was like a triple loaded question that I don't even think the best barrister in London could have turned around. But there you go. So hit us up. Make sure you ask some questions. It's free. You just type it in the question box and we'll come to it. So kick us off, Ben.
Nice. Yeah. How's everyone like my new studio? I'm already there. I'm almost there. Obviously, if you're listening on Spotify, you can't see it, but those that are tuning on YouTube, I'm making a few tweaks. Got a few LED lights going on. Improved my sound quality. Improved my videos via a Sony a webcam, which I'm super excited about. So it looks way crisper than it has done in the past. So
did you pick that up from last season's Blue Peter? Is it Blue Peter?
God, that is a blast. That's a blast from the past. It is, yeah, old school. No, I got on a Black Friday sale, as you do. I've been absolutely smashing the Amazon orders over the last couple of weeks. The amount of cardboard I've got in my waste bin is ridiculous. But yeah, lots of good stuff. So yeah, I might actually do a bit of a rundown of what I've got here because I know a lot of people are setting up their own studios at home now for podcasting and whatnot, and I've done a lot of research into the kit that I've used, so I'll probably break that down in a video later on. But anyway, back to property development and point number one, which is investment opportunities. We have numerous opportunities that are upcoming, and this was just a shout out because we give away a lot of free content on these podcasts. There's a lot of listeners that are either property developers or growing businesses, but fundamentally we do a lot of this to show what we're capable of, what we've got in the pipeline to raise investment. Our business doesn't work unless we get external investment through. We have a significant amount of projects coming up in the pipeline. We've raised over now £16 million worth of equity in the last 6 to 7 years, close to probably 50 million in debt, maybe somewhere around that level.
Yeah, sounds risky.
Yeah, and we've got it does, and we've got coming up in Q1 of 2025 a new project, which is something we'll be discussing a little bit later in terms of listed building consents and whatnot. But we've also got some land deals coming through. So whether you've got £200,000 or £2 million that you're looking to invest into the UK real estate market, we'd love to have a chat with you. We are award-winning property developers. We've won numerous awards over the last 3 or 4 years, from the Property Deal of the Year, HMO awards, and social housing awards for our social housing stock that we've been building down in southwest London. So just a note to top and start this podcast off with, to say we are open for investment. We're looking to speak to more people, and we've got lots of exciting projects coming through the pipeline. So if you're interested in investing in the UK real estate market, you've been following us for a while but haven't maybe picked up the phone and reached out to understand how you can work with us, please do reach out. That was it, really. Cool. Point number 2, why would you buy a back-to-back? Jack, why would you buy a back-to-back?
Yeah, so we have before talked about back-to-back sales, or also actually more legally correctly phrased subsale. A back-to-back is actually quite an old term. I actually first heard it from my dad when he sort of said, "Why don't you back-to-back it?" But actually the correct terminology a lawyer would use is a subsale. Essentially what it is you agree to buy something in a contract. You may exchange on that set of contracts, but the contract is assignable. Which basically means you can assign that contract to the ultimate buyer, and then the ultimate buyer complete on the technically agent on the site without actually completing on itself. There's obviously huge risks that come with that. If the end ultimate buyer doesn't complete, you're still liable to complete on the purchase. So I would recommend, if you do end up facilitating a back-to-back sale or a sub-sale, you've got your funding or ducks in a row, or de-risked it and made sure that the end buyer has also got some hurt money in, i.e. exchanged way before the date that you need to get your ducks in a row. But I'm talking actually today as the ultimate buyer. We've been the middleman multiple times, and we're in Central Suites. We're now actually going to be the ultimate buyer. So what I wanted to sort of express and just sort of share in this episode is, you're probably thinking, why would we be the people that are paying more than what the middle buyer has got the contract agreed for? And I'm going to explain why. Because coincidentally, my lawyer called me up and said, "You do realise this is a subsale," and obviously the middle buyer had been very transparent in the legal process. Sometimes you can actually do it without the seller knowing, or necessarily the buyer knowing. It's very difficult to do that because there's email threads from lawyers, and sometimes they can cotton on to that. But I'm actually talking about, why would we as a company be the ultimate buyer when our game is margin on real estate, and we're normally the middle person that agrees it at X, sells it at Y, and may make a bit of money in between. And I'm going to share why. So what we're buying is actually a mixed-use building that we're obviously going to be converting into some form of HMO. I won't go into too much detail about the project because we can come on to that in later episodes, and it's kind of irrelevant because I'm actually sharing details about that purchase, but it's relevant to the whole market. So we're buying a mixed-use building. The middle buyer for our purchase has agreed to buy 3 of these mixed-use sites across the south of the UK. They have, out of those 3, they've obviously got a block value to buy that. Almost like if you bulk buy at Costco, you get a discount because you're buying volume rather than the individual items. So the costs are cheaper for the supplier. So they're buying 3, therefore they've got it at a discount. So they are probably making a fairly sound investment on the fact that they're just going in and buying 3. We are buying one of those 3. And it's probably for them because it's quite a dry income, and they don't have the skill sets or the expertise to add value and create the HMO that we're going to create. We obviously have that competitive edge on that one particular purchase. Now, for them to buy that asset, it's worth what it costs them to buy as the purchase price, and also all of the purchase costs. So their actual net yield, which you can work out after all the purchase costs, because if you're going to sell something and you're selling a yield, you also have to factor in that they've got stamp duty, legals, and all of the purchase costs to buy that property. You're technically, when they subsell it to us, they're saving all of the stamp duty and fees. So if we waited for them to complete and then bought it, that site owes them more. So the reason we're the ultimate buyer in this is, one, because we've got an angle that they don't have. and I can confidently say that, even though it's going online and we haven't even got there yet, because they don't want to get their hands messy with HMOs. They're not set up that way. So that's one value add there. And point two is, if they have to complete on it, they're going to spend about £15,000 to £20,000 on just buying that one as a standalone asset, as well as part of the other two, which come with their own costs. So by the time that they've bought it, they would need to sell it for 15 to 20 grand more. So we're going in and getting it cheaper on the sub sale, because they're not transacting on that. So they're basically shifting it out for the same value once you work down the actual bottom line. So technically, we're getting it cheaper than if we would wait for them to complete and then buy that end asset. Granted, it is a little bit frustrating knowing that we weren't the original buyer and could have agreed to buy one or three of them, but the deal still works. So you've got to take that into consideration. So why we would be the end buyer is to get in, complete on the timeframes that they've insisted on. We get it significantly cheaper than if they were to transact on it, because they've got some wasted costs there, and it works for us. So why wouldn't we go ahead and buy it? So that's an example of why you might be a middleman, and why you also might be the ultimate buyer, because normally when we've shared sub sales, we are actually normally the middleman and have traded a site back on for a margin, but now we're actually the person that's paying the value for the end contract for that one particular purchase. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, sort of, it's worth to you what it's worth to you. You know, if you can see added value that others can't, which means you can pay more for something, then why wouldn't you pay a higher price to someone that's selling it and arranged the deal previously? It can make complete sense. We know, even yesterday we were having conversations about this. Are we talking about the same project here? Is it in Abingdon?
No.
Oh, okay. It's not the same project. But anyway, when we have conversations about other stuff, and we'll have conversations about squeezing value out of things, being more efficient, understanding the planning process far better, adding much more value than other people might have been able to. So yeah, we can sometimes afford to pay more because we know we can unlock more potential and value through our skill sets. Yeah, makes sense. Cool.
Yeah.
Business banking.
This is actually a little bit of a shout out into our network and see if anyone's got any recommendations, because we have a plethora of Metro accounts and they're just super easy to set up. You'll actually see service in branch and business centers. Metro is top voted for service. They've had a couple of wobbles in the market of potential really bad wobbles, essentially, that people worrying that they wouldn't still be trading. And a lot of people have moved into more the sort of fintech or tech-based, or even not even branch-based banks such as Monzo, Starling, Tide. We've had actually two of those three. But we're looking to shift our trading businesses sort of, I would say, more where there's more like continuity, where you've got salaries going in and out. It would be nice to be with a branched bank. So actually on here we've got second is Handelsbank, third is Lloyds, fourth is Bank of Scotland, and fifth is Santander. Those are the types of banks that you can walk in and actually get a service if there's a problem. Starling or Tide, you have no way other than a digital message with, you don't even know where they're based. You don't know if they're going to come back to you very promptly. I can actually say fairly good things about Starling and Tide, but I think there's that old school element, that human nature, that we would just prefer to deal with people that are almost that you can go and complain to when something's gone wrong, right, or indifferent. So we're looking to shift. We're looking at some high street banks so that we can actually walk in with our problems. But most of our SPVs we're still comfortable to keep within Metro or even potentially Tide. It's very seamless and easy to open those bank accounts. There's normally not a load of transactions going through or in or out of them, because we haven't got the expenses of the business, the revenues of the business. It's normally just an SPV, buy, build, sell, and very few transactions sort of actually transacting through. But reaching out to see if anyone's got any recommendations, we'd love to hear them. We've already engaged conversations with Handelsbank. We're obviously already with Metro Bank, but it seems like they might be up there with the best. We've already got a business bank account with NatWest. I don't know if you want to add anything on this, Ben, but it's just a shout out to see if anyone out there is working with a bank and they cannot floor them and they think they're amazing, comment, because we'd love to know.
I did see something posted about Revolut recently, that they're like the fastest growing tech sort of finance sort of bank platform of late, but I don't know how they perform, to be honest. So yeah, no, your suggestions here look pretty sound. No further comment.
Straight off Google search.
Is it? Nice. Cool. New utilities are an absolute pain in my arse. Every single project, there are delays, there are issues. You bring in a utilities consultant, but fundamentally, I find that we always end up, doing the stuff that we would have been doing anyway. So I sometimes question whether or not we should even bother and just bring it all in house and save the cash. But the one thing that I wanted to comment on, which hopefully saves you from costing yourselves delays and loads more costs in the future, is about the thing that I see overlooked massively when people go out to tender, and the costs that are often missed. Because when you go out to tender, more often than not, you won't have the level of detail that you have halfway through a project when the utility providers have actually finally got back to you with solutions and started resolving, asking questions about actually what's being installed and what level of loadings you need for your electrical connections or your Thames water connections, and if you've got a fire sprinkler system, all that sort of stuff. So often not when you're tendering at the very start of a project, you might not have all the details. And this, I think, is where costs always start to creep in when you get into the actual project, because there's been no allowance for some of these following works. So more often than not, you'll have all of the connections within inside the building, all of the connections to the final, to the initial meter boards and the point of connections for the utilities. But what I always find is missing is the cost associated with the contractor digging the trenches and doing the works from your meter board, for example, to the point of connection at the boundary. And most often, that is something that will be the responsibility of your contractor. If you've not got a PC sum in there, or you've not discussed that during the tender process, that can often be quite a significant cost on you as the developer, because it's not been factored in anywhere. So I guess my word of wisdom is make sure that you actually have a PC sum or some sort of provisional sum to allow for trenches to get from your meter boards to the point of connection at the boundary, because most utilities providers will only bring their services to the boundary line, and then everything beyond that is yours to do. Now, you're never going to be able to nail down the exact cost, because sometimes you won't even know where it's going to come in. And on this particular project that I'm sharing on screen, which is the old maltings, we've gone through 4 applications with SSE to try and find a solution that works for everyone. One of the routes was via a private estate, where we were basically being bent over backwards for fees to get them to agree to something, and even then it didn't really satisfy SSE's requirements. We've gone down a different route now, which seems to be amenable, but it does mean bringing our services through third-party land, and that's another point. So what we've asked for in this scenario is that the SSE provider installer gives us a price to bring it from the main road through the third-party land to our boundary line. Now, I've got a feeling they might be really expensive to do that, but at least we've then got a cost to go back to our contractor with and understand where it sits if we actually have to get our contractor to dig that line rather than having the SSE contractors do it. So it's fraught with issues. Utilities, we've spent probably double the amount we expected to on most of our sites, because there's so many unforeseens, there's so many delays in what they do. It's not an easy process, and even utilities consultants, I do find, don't necessarily speed up the process for us. But yeah, I think the one thing I wanted to get across is the most commonly overlooked cost that I see is actually digging the trenches from the boundary line to the final connection points within your site, and just to make a provisional sum allowance for those costs during the tender process. Don't overlook.
Is there like a cost per meter that you could advise is a good budget?
Not at the moment, because it's also going to vary. Sometimes you're digging up the same trench 3 times, because there's no chance in hell of getting your electricity supplier and your gas supplier and your open reach supplier to all do their works on the same day where you've got an open trench. You're often digging the hole, you're putting in one service, you're covering it over. Then 2 weeks later or a month later, the new provider's coming in, you're undoing that hole and opening it again. So coordinating the utilities like that is just absolute nightmare. On your question, I think I probably will remind me, Christina, to come back next week with an actual cost of what we would expect to pay, depending on, if you're digging a 900 deep trench by bucket wide, 600 mil, for example, what would we expect to pay on a meter length, linear meterage, for that type of thing, because it would be quite useful for people. Yeah. So I'll come back to you on that. Cool. If you like listening into this Property Experts podcast, we really would love you to rate us on Spotify, for a review on Apple. I think we've got 2 or 3 reviews on Apple now, which is absolutely fantastic. And we do seem to be getting a lot more traction. This week, we want to do something slightly differently. If you're listening into this podcast, if you're watching this on YouTube or any other platform, share that you're listening to us. Tag XP Property on whatever platform you're doing, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever, tag us. And what we want to do in the next couple of weeks is gather all of those people and have a more intimate one-to-one video call with all of those people that have shared our podcast, and actually answer all of your questions live in a private scenario with just Jack and I and you guys. And we know there's a lot of people that tune in day to day. Some of you may be too shy to actually ask your questions during the live, have more intimate questions to ask about your businesses and want to share some more details around actual, figures and facts and things that are going on specifically within your businesses in a smaller, tight-knit format. So we're offering this out for those people that share anything around our Property Experts podcast. Tag us in the next couple of weeks. We'll get you all on a Zoom call, and you can have us at your beck and call for a whole hour on a Zoom call to ask whatever questions you see fit. Cool. You just completed on something. Congrats.
Yes. This is a little grade 2 listed. Well, it's not actually that little. It's actually quite big. It's almost 1,600 square feet. But yeah, we've completed on a grade 2 listed cottage. It was actually an equity release company. Quite a complicated situation that they got themselves into. Obviously, an owner-occupier wanted to release some equity. Equity release company stepped in, which is what they do, and lent the owner-occupier some capital. The owner-occupier moved on to whatever it was, a care home or whatever they do beyond that period. And then the equity release company take ownership of the property and sell it to basically recoup this almost like mortgage that they take out on the asset. After a few sales had fallen through, it started to get to a price that we thought was attractive to basically flip it. So this is a hopefully very quick flip, which is based in South Oxfordshire in a lovely little town called Dorchester on Thames, actually. It is in, although it's grade 2 listed, it's also got some form of like Roman burial ground that sort of overlaps some of the title. And you can also, from this particular road, which is a no-through road, it's a very, very nice area, you can see the Abbey, which I think is something like 800 years old, in Dorchester as well. It's a cute little town location, which is obviously a little bit concerning for like activity of sales, but it's kind of those sought after areas where, a lot of people, once they move to Dorchester, don't want to move out. It's a very desirable place. But I'll be coming on to like the next, what we're doing with it in terms of renovation wise. But this is purely price. Price was right. Get in, do a light refurb and get it back on the market to hopefully like a family that would appreciate and call it their own home. It was really, really difficult getting exit values on this particular property because the town has probably something like 300 houses in the town. So when you're looking at comparable evidence, it's really difficult to depict actually what this is going to sell for, what other comparables have come up for. And actually, while we've been in the process of selling it, the best thing that you can do is get local agents that have sold stock in the area, go to 5, get a value, get the average value, deduct to 20% margin just in case, and that's kind of like worst case scenario, and then work away from there. So yeah, super excited to get started on it. It's not really that strenuous in terms of what we need to do. It's kind of annoying because for me, like if you need to replace kitchens, bathrooms, decorate, sort out the windows, I'd rather it be like back to brick, because then at least you're putting in the time and getting more of a different change and result. But this one, it actually doesn't need a lot of work, but you still have to do you still have to touch on all of those points from a delivery and a design perspective and a finish perspective. But yeah, it's going to be quite exciting because we're essentially redoing the property and to make it feel a lot more modernized, but we're not changing any of the structure because we think that will delay the project significantly, and that is where finance costs start eating into flips. So it's kind of like getting it to a good base standard and then letting someone else that wants to create their own home to come up with their own ideas, because you're not going to please everyone. So it's kind of like almost creating a blank canvas for them. But one of the compromises of this property being old is all of the bedrooms are quite small. Small, I would say, in consideration of a modern home. So we're looking to fetch about 900,000 exit value for this property. And I just think that they're very compromised bedroom sizes for a property of that value. So what we're looking to do, which I'll also come on to shortly, is go in for planning to convert the garage into like a granny annex, whether it's a family that have a teenager that they could live sort of independently, or even actually use it as a granny annex for an elderly family member, or even a family member that's not elderly, but not actually develop that part. So we'll get the consent so that they can have that option if they want to. And the reason that we're doing that is with flips, every time you add more and more and more value, you're getting into a smaller market that can buy the property. So you almost want to get in and out as efficiently and cost effectively, but with value add, so that you're getting the best bang for your buck that you've invested in it. But you can overdo these types of properties, because at the end of the day, most of these buyers you're talking are probably, family household income of 100K in this particular area. They're not going to be, really going for swimming pool, huge extension. They kind of want to work on a project and have it as a more affordable asset to get into. And this is definitely the area of the market that we feel is going to get pinched, with like Labour government coming in, charging private school fees, because that those types of families are going to be living in close to £1 million homes, whereas people living in a £10 million home don't give a monkeys about the 20% VAT cost of school fees, because they probably spend that every morning when they go to their country club and have a cappuccino and a croissant. So it's all about staying lean and making sure you're not overcooking the egg a little bit.
Nice. Out of curiosity, what build contingency have you put in play for these listed buildings?
So this is a really small build cost. So we actually have quite a lumpy, I think we've actually got a contingency of about 50K. And to put that in perspective, that's probably 50% of the existing build costs. And it's because there's a couple of structural things that we just need to address to make it is mortgageable, because obviously there's currently a mortgage on it. But we just want to make sure that there's no nuances. We're going down the line of a buyer and, they go, the funny thing about grade 2 listed properties is it's so ambiguous. There's a road in Henley, and I was talking to the investor about this the other day. There's an alleyway where there's two houses, and the alleyway is so wonky you can't see down it. So it's only like 10 meters long, but you can't see down it because it's like so rickety. And I've looked online, they've both got mortgages on both those properties. But then you might get a valuer that goes around and go, well, that wall looks a bit funny. And then you sort of go, well, here's a photo from 300 years ago that was taken in a black and white camera. The wall hasn't changed since then, and it's been there 300 years, so it's probably not a problem. So we're just trying to clean it up a little bit to make sure that we're not getting dragged in legals. But yeah, that budget is mainly sort of accounted for that. But it should be fairly straightforward in terms of new kitchen, new bathroom, new wall finishes, new like redecorating, a few other like issues like cladding a couple of cheeks on dormers, but then just basically redecorating and putting new floor finishes in. So it's not going to be that onerous. So yeah, but nice easy refurb, hopefully.
Nice. Have you used XP Surveys to do a drone survey to give you roof information?
We should do that.
Yes. I'll give you mates rate.
Yes. We actually do need to, the roof's covered in moss, so we need to clean that off first. But we are actually planning on not doing too much to the roof. We're doing some internal stuff. Someone actually removed one of the chimney breast without putting a gallows bracket in a loft. So that's one thing that we've got to do, which is comical. But yes, drone survey. I mean, it'll be a full measure survey, but we can't actually instruct yet because the garden is so overgrown. Like, the garden is so overgrown, I'm surprised you can't see it from the front. It's like almost high, like these brambles, like almost higher than the house. But once that's all cut back, we'll do a full measure survey, and I'm sure do some sort of drone. It'll actually be a really cool drone shot because you'll get the abbey in the back. So definitely.
Sweet. Nice. Good.
Which cool. Actually, segues on to this.
Yeah, before we go into that, I wanted to say something that I've forgotten about what I want to say. Bollocks. All right, yeah, you crack on. I'll come back to it.
Too busy slipping into sales mode.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I wanted to share with this was actually a learning that I had from our project in Wallingford, and I don't know if Ben can relate to any of this for our listed buildings that we've developed and are developing or also applying for planning in XP Property. But basically, what I've learned with listed building consent is the applications are typically free of charge, which is, beyond me why that is. So the obviously cost that comes to you as a developer or an investor is pulling that application together, which you might pay an architect or a heritage consultant to pull that together. But the actual application is free. So what we've actually instructed our heritage lady to do on this one is, rather than do one application, because we want to save costs, we've done one application and sliced it up into 3 applications. And the reason that we have done that is because I don't want to be held up doing works for some of it because the other more contentious parts are not approved. So that's why we've sliced it up into 3 items. And now I believe the garage conversion / extension, which I mentioned, which will be a full planning application and listed building application, is going to be super contentious because it's in I can't actually remember that it's in like a historic appreciation area because of the abbey. So because the property is in view site, it's kind of like conservation area on steroids. I'll have to dig out the exact terminology when Ben starts speaking, but it's crazy. And then we've also got a Roman burial ground at the back. So I mean, it's almost like asking for heritage trouble. But the principle is, there's a lot of things which I would call light works. So this is also really useful for our contractor. So I've split, if you can see on video, that's great, but I'll try and explain it for the podcast listeners. So we've basically gone start to finish every job that we need to do in construction. So that's all the way from clearing the house to putting the gallows bracket in the loft that I mentioned, redoing all the electrics, putting 2 new bathrooms in, and everything is on its own line item. We've then got 5 columns. One's like consideration, like what would you consider it as? Maintenance, repairs, structural, works, invasive works that are going to impact the existing fabric of the building, which is a big, catchphrase for heritage people. The fabric is what they're really excited about. And then we've got three columns to the right, which are no consents, so things that we can do without consent. So that will be if we have a grade 2 listed window that's even part of the listing, and it's a white window with the original glazing, and all we're doing is improving its sort of look to make sure that it's well painted and using the same paint color and making sure that's in line with maintaining, we won't need consent for that. If we go into light works, so for an example, ripping the kitchen out and putting a new kitchen in, although I don't see that as an impact of heritage, because I can full well tell you now that the kitchen in there isn't 300 years old, but it is going to be more impacting the fabric of the building. So that falls part of light works, listed building consent. And then we have the third application, which is disruptive application for listed building consent. So that is things like replacing timber windows on the front elevation. That is clearly, we're taking out the old windows, we're putting in 2 new ones. But the issue with that is they're going to want section plans, they're going to want design plans, they're going to want window depth plans, they're going to want what glazing we're putting in, they're going to put ironmongery plans, they're going to put hinge plans, they're going to put literally all of these things heritage will want to see to the nth degree, but that will hold up all of the other construction if that's all pulled together in one application. And then last but not least, full application and listed builder consent. So those applications will go in concurrently. They will all be approved at different times. All of them will have post sort of approval things that we will have to do and get design sign off by the heritage consultant. And what my biggest pet peeve was with on Wallingford is it's in South Oxfordshire district. That we're applying there, we got our listed building application to convert a listed building that's a 3-bedroom flat to a 7-bedroom 5-bathroom HMO, and it came in within probably 14 weeks, which is actually quite quick. But the issue is they've taken 14 weeks to approve architrave. And like you get the consent, you're like, oh, that was quicker than I thought. And then you're cracking on with, the relative works to get to the point, and you submit all of the sign off things that you need to be signed off. And then you're waiting forever. So we've learned from that, and we've split the application so that we can do like bite-sized works as we go through. And if the windows don't get approved for 3 months, we'll fit them in 3 months. That's not an issue, but it hasn't held up the other parts of the schedule. So it's all about being tactical on schedule and making sure that you're almost like playing the game of ensuring that you're keeping your continuity of build going, rather than just sitting and waiting, because Wallingford did sit and wait. It was a structural problem and we couldn't actually do anything until that structural problem was resolved. But I don't want to be in a position again where we're just waiting, because that is just time's money, and it's also just emotionally painful. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add. Ben, I don't know if you wanted to add more.
I think that explains it really well. Like, it's kind of least path of resistance, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like try to chip away at it as much as possible, and not as you said at the beginning, have something that's really contentious hold up and everything else that may not be contentious at all. So we'll often try and do that in our developments, like with the old maltings. We didn't want to submit the new builds with the conversion works because the new builds were more contentious. So, and they're completely separate to the main building as well. So why not separate them onto a different application and let that run in tandem in its own thing? Because otherwise it's going to hold up works that you could be cracking on with day one. So yeah, no, it makes complete sense. Thank you, Peter, for your comment. Peter said, thanks for the explanation last week on criteria for selecting a suitable investment area. Love the spreadsheet. If you've not checked out last week's episode, head over to season 2, episode 47. Jack goes into really a lot of detail with the spreadsheet that him and his brother used to find suitable investment areas, reviewing yields and availability and supply and demand ratios and everything. But a really good place to start if you're looking to find the ideal investment.
We actually had a listener reach out for the template. So if anyone out there wants that template from last episode, hit me up.
Good. And I have an apology for Peter, because I do have on my list of things to do to send you my sort of development coding breakdown that you asked for. I've got a bit of a confession. I haven't completed it yet fully. So as soon as I have finished it completely, I will send it across to you. And if anyone else is interested, drop a message below. We can send you a link to a Google form to fill out requesting specific templates that you've heard us talk about. We're very open and transparent about giving away a lot of that stuff that we use. So yeah, message us below if you want to get some of our forms and standard templates. Cool. Hoarding doing its job again. So we talked about Archway Court in Marlow last week. That photo isn't of the updated photos. Actually, you'll see again sort of the word court is missing from our hoarding. Also, it's a number that is not going to get us anywhere because it's only got 10 digits and isn't the right number. So yeah, we had a bit of an error, but our hoarding guy has been on site and stuck on the new lettering, and it does look fantastic now. So super happy with that. But the main thing I wanted to get across is kind of the importance of doing this type of stuff. Getting interest on your site as early as possible. In the lead up to your sales process, you want to hit the market running. And we've already had 14 inquiries. I think we installed it. You can see there on the 20th of November, we had the first. So 9 days ago, we had our first 5 inquiries. So as soon as the hoarding went up, clearly a little bit of buzz around the area, people walking past, a lot of footfall on West Street in Marlow, where our development is. And since then, we've had even more inquiries just trickling in. So 14 inquiries to date in 9 days. Even if you sell one flat off of that sort of early interest, that's absolutely brilliant. We've let people know that on the 16th of December, we'll have our show flat completed. So just under 3 weeks away from getting one of our 2-bed flats on the ground floor, fully finished, and with show home furniture in situ. We've had a lot of people reach out to book viewings in before Christmas anyway. So yeah, excited to see how this one plays out. We're going to be launching over the Christmas period. For those that don't know, I think Boxing Day is the most viewed Rightmove day in the year. People obviously sort of sat feeling fat on the sofa, eating too much, drunk too much, looking at where they want to live in the next year, and maybe dreaming somewhat maybe as well, just seeing what's out there and being nosy. But yeah, Hoarding doing a great job. It did a fantastic job for us at St Andrew's Court, and it's doing a good job at Archway Court in Marlow. And also we've had some inquiries from the Hoarding over in Colney Hatch Lane in Muswell Hill as well. So yeah, you can spend 3 to 4 grand on this type of thing, but it's well worth it, getting a jump on inquiries and future sales. Cool. And on to our build and bond event. I'll have a quick chat and then Jack can chip in. But it's something that we've done now 4 or 5 times. We've managed to get between 20 and 30 architects and built environment professionals in the room. We put it on as XP surveys. The idea is that most of the people in that room are people that we want to serve. People that need measured building surveys, need topographical surveys, need roof surveys, and it's an event that we get a lot of success from a business perspective. Bringing those people together, a lot of exposure within the right network and the right target audience, but also we're learning lots as well, because the speakers that we've had involved in our events are people that we can work within our businesses. We've had Claire Truman, who's heritage consultant, give us some really useful information on listed buildings that Jack's been talking about a lot. We've had a guy from Lumi Plugin, which is a really interesting product that integrates LED lighting with other fittings like sprinkler heads, heat detectors, smoke detectors, all in one fitting, so you can reduce that ceiling acne. A guy from Loxon, Cameron, I think his name was, talking about home automation and the availability of how to integrate different services within your home to work remotely and via apps, etc. And this week we had Ian from Biodiversity Biodiversity Units. That's his company name, isn't it? And he basically coordinates and helps developers buy biodiversity net gain credits from various different habitats around the UK. So for those of you that don't know what biodiversity net gain is, really do need to look this up and understand what's happening in that space, because as of I think April this year, it affects absolutely every development that you're going to be working on. The government want a 10% increase in biodiversity net gain. Biodiversity on the site, so it's something that you can't avoid, and it is going to really over the next year or so going to impact land values, and there'll be a lot of people overpaying for sites and agreeing levels that they shouldn't be, because actually they've got a 50-60 grand biodiversity net gain bill that they have to pay to offset what they can't do on site. So yeah, definitely scrub up on your biodiversity net gain information.
I think
Jack, do you want to talk about the event?
I think you've pretty much covered most of it off, but obviously we put on these events to selfishly also learn a little bit ourselves, which is always fun. But yeah, it was actually a very interesting topic, because I feel that the term, you've probably seen over our socials over the last few weeks, sharing that we're putting on this event. Biodiversity is an unknown, and we had 20 people in the room, and the first question was, can you just explain, almost like Idiot's Guide, what this is? And we've never had that before, because you don't normally say to a planning consultant, how does planning work? So it was really walking through the motions and understanding how the biodiversity works. And it is actually a huge change that's coming into play. Well, it already is in play. It was only adopted for larger applications, and now since April, it's been adopted for smaller applications as well. So it is hugely impacting. And Ben mentioned that the government are now saying by law you have to improve the site by 10%. But what you've got to remember is, if you're removing 50% of the land there, you've got to improve the site by 60%, because you're subtracting away from its original stance. But it was super interesting to listen to. I found he was given more and more value the more questions that we actually asked around it, and the substance around it, like rules of thumb or values, the offsite contributions versus trying to produce it on site. And fundamentally, if I could give you one top tip to take away from what I took away from the particular site, is make sure the ecologist that you're working with your particular property or development or land that you're working with understands biodiversity. They're commercially minded and they want to work with you, and they understand the starting point and the end point. Because what you will find is, if you're going down the sort of route of just instructing someone because they're the first on Google and not actually anticipating that they understand what you're trying to do and want to work with you, you really will be in a much worse position from instructing the wrong ecologist. So I'd definitely recommend that you have your ducks in a row and they understand the ecology and BNG, so that you can work with them to sort of cooperate with that. And it also seems that ecologists, if they are pragmatic about how they do work, you might actually remove trees before you particularly put in the application or do the sort of biodiversity initial assessment, if you don't necessarily need those trees there, for an example. But yeah, it's crazy. It's going to be costly and impactful, and I'd highly recommend that you study this space, which you can do by coming to events like ours and watching the keynote speakers that we have, but definitely reading up online. And actually, we've got some recommendations of things that he said that you could do, including like a 101 explanation, which we can share in the notes as well.
Yeah, I think, Jack, actually one of the key things that I took away was one of your comments that you sort of had to go through on one of your sites, where effectively, to get around some of the requirements, you've reduced the red line boundary in your planning application. So obviously, if you're working in one area, want to develop one area of the building, and you've got a wild meadow, for the rest of the site, by restricting the red line boundary that you're applying for planning permission in, you're only improving that red line boundary with a net gain of 10%, rather than looking at the wider picture, which has a wild flower meadow and ponds and all this sort of stuff, which is high ecological value. So a 10% improvement on a high ecological value thing is a massive improvement, whereas 10% improvement on something that's shit or tarmac, has no ecological value, is a far easier, thing to gain than it is on something bigger. So, yeah, I thought that was a great little tip. I think one of the other things is that a credit, biodiversity credit, will cost you somewhere between 26 and 28 grand, as a typical sort of rule of thumb. Obviously, the key thing is how many units you actually need to offset on site. And he was talking through a private house that was having work done to it, where the actual credit amount was 0.044 or something stupid like that, and it cost them 600 quid. So, it's more about the number of units, but each unit, as a rule of thumb, will be somewhere between 26 and 28,000 pounds. But it's a really, really broad topic. Get to know your ecologist, like Jack says. Work with people like Ian to try and be that middleman. They have access across the UK to all these outsourced and sort of habitats that are being created specifically where you can buy these credits. So if you can't provide the requirement on site, you'll have to do it off site. And he has really good connections around the UK with habitats that provide units to you for a cost. And the one thing that found quite interesting actually is that the government also, or the planning process, you also need a 30-year management plan in place. So if you try to create an on-site biodiversity, try to tick the box on site, you also have to have a 30-year program to maintain that space. If you put a wildflower meadow at the end of your new houses, there's got to be a 30-year program in place. Now, how does that work legally? Do you have to write that into the contract? Is any person that's buying that property going to see that in the legal process and be like, oh God, that sounds like a nightmare. I don't really want that. I'm going to either chip the price or go elsewhere. So there are other implications about it might be cheaper to provide it on site if you can, but then you're lumbered with the 30-year sort of management of it. Whereas if you're buying off-plan credits units, then that responsibility goes over to that habitat provider. So there's really a lot to this, and you should absolutely brush up on your BNG.
I would also say that if you don't take on that management and you hand it over to the new owners of the properties, they're going to factor that in as a cost and a liability for them to, so it might impact the resale values of your units. So super important to assess when developing.
Yeah, just another massive red tape, and in an area where they're trying to improve the number of houses that we create, and it's just another one of those red tape things. But I can see that there's about 6 people listening and tuning in on YouTube. One thing that I wanted to mention earlier that I forgot was what time suits you guys? We do these things on a Friday at 5 p.m. I understand it's people maybe winding down from work or going out for a beer after work, but we want as live an audience as possible, because that's where the best questions come in, and we can answer them there and then. So let us know in the comments down below, what time do you think would be more beneficial to provide these lives, or if 5 p.m. on a Friday suits you, then let us know.
I have also found the detail around the property that we bought in Dorchester. So the property is listed, which has a listing status and number, and you can obviously go on the heritage page and find that. But it is also a Roman town, Dorchester, which has its own listing status as almost like conservation of that Roman town. And it's included as a scheduled monument of the Romans. So basically the abbey is a Roman monument.
Nice.
And funnily, I was chatting to the heritage consultant. I said, "You do realise it's and I basically said all this stuff when I had it to hand, because I even forgot it." And she said, "What's that?" And I went, "Oh shit, we're in trouble."
If they don't know what it is, then
I was like, "Yeah, problemo. Backtrack."
You're not going to be able to change a door handle without their approval.
Yeah. Yeah, unless you're wearing robes and have a sword.
Peter, do local councils understand the biodiversity net gain requirements? It's going to vary, but on the whole, no. There's Ian said at the start, is like, I speak to numerous developers on a daily basis, and 95% of those developers don't have a clue where to start or what it's even about. So that is absolutely trickling down into councils as well. They don't really know what to do. He often actually bombards them with a lot of data sheets and stuff and forms and whatnot, which he said, it just bamboozle them with loads of information, and they essentially be a little bit more lenient on what they need, because they think you know more than what you're talking about, basically. Cool. National Development Summit. So I've been sponsoring Brendan's Central London Property Network for the last, I think, 4 years with Aura Architecture. It's a great event. This is Jack and I back in the early days. This must have been in probably 2017, 2018, back right at the start of XP Property. This is us speaking at one of Brendan's events. He's been hosting monthly meets for 15 years next year, which is mad. And the National Development Summit is something that he stopped doing in 2020. Obviously, sort of COVID hit, and he's only just really started picking up the baton again. But it's a fantastic event. It's going to be a one-day event on a Saturday in February 2025. He's currently looking for sponsors. If you're interested, reach out. It's a great opportunity to get in front of the best part. I think last time 200 attendees, property investors, property developers. Massive event with loads of great speakers and loads of great networking opportunities.
I actually would say I think it's the best event I've ever been to in property. I loved it. The reason I wanted to chat about this today is I met with Brendan earlier today. He made his way out of the city to come and see me in the sunny Reading. Nice. But the reason I'm reaching out today is because we went through I'm helping him from a structure of what panels and topics and people that are getting involved. And I just wanted to say that we, as always, and I know that there's female property groups out there struggling to influence the sort of weighting of how many females are part of it, and we really want to encourage that. So just reaching out that if you're listening to this and you're in property and you are female, we have tons of male, obviously male people. Reach out if you want to be part of the event in some capacity too, but we really want to encourage more females as part of the event for panels, hosting, panels, chairing panels, maybe a keynote talk. But if you're in property and a speciality, please just DM us. We'd love to get you involved. And if you, worst case, don't want to get involved, come along, because it's definitely my favorite event. He hasn't done it for a few years, and I'm so excited for it. But that was the main message from that slide.
Nice. Cool. Show and tell.
Yes. So we obviously the first slide on this agenda today was talking about investment and investment raising. One thing that I would encourage anyone to do out there, if they're doing projects or raising capital, is show the people around your projects. If you don't have a project, obviously you can't do that, but I'd highly recommend you get them to site and walk around the particular scheme. I can almost guarantee the investors that we took around this project will be watching this. But essentially, we're buying a new project with an investor. I said, come and meet us. Let's go around all of our sites, grab a coffee, grab a bit of lunch, whatever it may be. And essentially, the deal that you can see in front of you has had absolutely every problem from a structural perspective that you can imagine, and actually was really, really difficult to overcome those from a heritage delivery perspective. But it's turned a corner, the project's cracking on really well. And I guess you may think to yourself, do I show them a project that's been really difficult and where you haven't foreseen a particular issue that you might have been able to foresee in a different light? But I actually think, and we've always had the view that transparency is ultra key. Things do go wrong. It's how you handle them. So I quite openly showed our investor around this project, showed them all of the issues that we had with it and everything that we had to overcome. And I actually feel that's a more impactful relationship if you can show how you've overcome big problems and not just hidden them, and maybe shown. I could have shown that particular investor 20 other different HMOs that have been a piece of piss, been an existing box, and we've knocked it around and created a beautiful little home. But no, we wanted to show them one in construction, one pre-construction, one post-construction, and that's exactly what we did. And this is one that was in, and it just sort of location worked really well for where we were meeting. So I showed them it, and I was like, this one's been an absolute pig to deliver, but we're getting there. And that's part of it. They have to appreciate that when shit gets tough, you're going to be in there fighting and getting the deal, getting the deal to where it needs to be. And that resilience is, I think, more important than just showing a squeaky clean, I'm perfect, sort of a foray of projects, because social media is full of it. There's not a lot of people out there that show the quirks and warts of what property brings and how many challenges you will face. And fundamentally, it isn't easy. And I know a lot of people that go, I wouldn't have done this project if I'd have known how difficult it was. But now you're halfway there, you might as well finish it off. And that is quite commonly the way. But equally, it's all about the finishing. If you can't finish, that's the more important part. So yeah, don't be afraid to show your investors the warts and alls, as long as you're obviously overcoming them. But then again, would they invest in someone that wouldn't overcome them? So just the reality behind the closed doors.
Nice. Cool. So on to the Q&A. There's a couple of questions that we've got going on here. I think let's start with the simple one, which absolutely is asked. Hi both, and congrats on the baby, Ben. Thank you very much. Jack, you mentioned using overage clauses to challenge sellers' inflated GDVs, call their bluff. Do you think this approach works in resi deals where communication is often through agents? I've noticed many resi agents dismiss overages and other creative offers outright when they claim high GDVs.
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult one because you have to. We've actually had overage is. Well, it wasn't even an overage. It was like a delayed completion contract or an overage agreed where the agents don't understand it. And that is because they're not commercial agents. A lot of agents that work in commercial sales have been through a real estate degree or something along those lines. Most, and I'm talking about the majority here, most residential agents don't have any of that experience. They haven't specialized in or done a higher education degree in real estate. So they don't understand how to value things, how contracts work, the legalities, so you do have to be extra considerate of who your audience is and how you're getting things agreed. I completely agree with that. Absolutely. But what I would highly recommend is to incentivize the agent to work with you. And how you do that is obviously if an agent's selling a house, normally, typically, traditionally, the seller of the property will pay the agent's fees. I will normally also pay them a fee on the on the purchase as well, because what they may be thinking, let's say the property is up for sale for 500k, but it's worth 600k, but you're offering an overage of 200k, so you will eventually pay 700k for a 600k listing, which they're expecting their fee out of 600k. I would just tell them I'll pay the difference up front to get it agreed, which might be 1% of 100 grand, for an example, so not a lot of capital for you. And then obviously when the overage is agreed, you then pay the agent out their fee. So keep them on side. It is difficult explaining it to I find residential agents specifically, because it's not really their bag. If it's a site that sort of triggers a lot of overagey stuff, that's normally via a commercial agent. So you will just have to spend a bit more time walking them through that. And essentially, don't even go in essentially saying that, you know, I'm a property professional, this is what I do, I like to agree overages, and I think that the land and pound per square foot and net saleable area and GIA is all worth this. What you want to do is just do it in simple terms and say that we want to go for planning. If we get the planning, we will pay you X. But we will also buy the house up front, and just keep it super simple. You don't need to use all the jargon and lingo with the residential agents. If it's a commercial agent, very different. You know, I actually say to a commercial agent, do you think an overage would do well on this offer? And they will say, I think so, or I don't think so. That they want high value and they can wait, or whatever it may be. So explain it well. You can get them agreed in resi, because we have done before, but just keep it super simple.
Nice. Good stuff. Question number 2. It's quite a long one, so I'm going to sort of paraphrase really, but essentially the question is all about kind of going through the gears in terms of size of businesses, talking about moving from like a solo developer to having just a PA or something, someone to help with the administration. Size 2, sort of adding 1 or 2 members of staff. And then size 3, having a team, team behind you. We've got 8 people now in XP Property through sort of property developer, project management. We've just taken on an office and estate management because the portfolio is growing, and we needed that level of support. We've got finance and legal. We've got a team now, so we've kind of gone through those different gears. And the question is all about how you work through those different gears, what things to delegate. How we sort of manage workloads, and who to hire first, and what roles to hire first. And we have delved into this in the past loosely, but yeah, let's sort of jump into it. And I'll sort of start with saying something that I always say when we talk about this type of stuff is to make sure that the first hire that you are making is an administration type role. You are generally the person that is adding huge amounts of value through your contacts, through finding deals, through finding investment. That can't be done via admin. The only thing that's going to weigh you down and stop you from doing more of that stuff is all of the legwork and administration that comes around that. So bringing in administration to help manage emails, to send templates, to organize your calendar and your diary. Those are the sorts of things that you need to be bringing in that are more sort of lower value type tasks, and not necessarily the higher income generating tasks that you need to be doing as the business owner. So yeah, my advice would always be to hire administration first before hiring any sort of skilled people below you that are going to be far more expensive.
Yeah, all I was going to add to that is like the key thing for me here is 2 elements. It's cash flow, and then like P&L and kind of like forecasting, because you kind of can't really hire anyone permanent freelance, or freelance could be pulled into a project, but permanent staffing should always be forecasted in your sort of 3-year forecast, where you're forecasting 3 years ahead of like where you are today, where you want to be in 3 years, where you can be in 3 years, obviously, because it's got to be a forecast. Goals are very different to forecasts. Forecasts are what you actually anticipate to bring in. Projects get delayed, funds get delayed, so you obviously you have to be very cautious of where you bring in that overhead, factoring in that. And then also overhead. So for an example, that I know the person that asked this question could afford his VA through his own income. So that's a really sensible hire to make, because you can then pay that person to take a lot of weight off your desk, and you still got capital and time left. But then scaling a business is super difficult in a development company, because it's super sporadic income with very consistent outcome. So you need to make sure that you forecast as best as you can to facilitate the right hires at the right time. And if you look at a 3-year forecast, you actually go, actually, we can hire that sooner or that later. And also, if it's a revenue generating person, you might be able to hire it sooner, because you might just be 3 months worth of cost by the time that they bring in value. If it's admin, the value that they're bringing you is more time for you, which is costly, because your time should be probably the most costly in the business, unless you're growing, quite a significant business and you've got, in-house lawyers or whatever it may be. So that's a very pernickety thing to have to think about. And what I love about this question, is actually from Harry, is he's clearly thought about where he wants to be with his business. He's kind of said, I do want a lean freelance team, but how do you go about sort of building that? Obviously, Ben and I have gone for a UK based, I wouldn't call this a massive team, but for a developer, I think we're quite big. There's a lot of developers that are around Henley-on-Thames where there's 2 people that are on the actual payroll, and the rest are subcontractors and people around them. So it's all about where you want to go, how you financially can afford that, thinking about, are they fee earning? Because it's very easy to make a hire if there's an expense to the business in that capacity, and then you're sort of saving that expense, but you're also bringing it in-house. Then you also have to think about that expense is every month, whether you're doing deals or not, whether that project sells or not. You've then got to factor that in from a cash flow perspective. And it is something you have to think about. You've got to, I don't know anyone in the development game that goes, we've got payroll next week, and got to run a cash flow or whatever it may be. It's something, a responsibility that you have to take on. And I know for this particular chap that asked a question, because he's kind of remotely developing, he's got to take that into consideration.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about some of the things that we do delegate, very quickly. Form filling is a massive thing. When we get the amount of stuff that we get legally, we're selling, we're on site for 5 sites. All of those have sales within them. So we are constantly liaising with the solicitors, doing conveyance plans and looking at leases and providing information and answering questions. I'm not the person that's sitting here doing that. That's what Tess's job is for. So she will break the back of a lot of that information and then just feed through the final 10% of questions that she can't answer, because she doesn't have as much in-depth knowledge of the actual project itself. So things like that, where you can hand a form over to your VA, your executive assistant, your finance and legal assistant, whatever it may be, to break the back of 90% of it. And then all you're really doing is spending your time filling in that final 10%. So what we've done in the past, and we've gone through this on screen, is have a sort of giant organogram of what the business, of all the different parts and sections within the business, and then have kind of who's associated and responsible for each element of or department of that business. At the moment, at the very start of the business, it was Jack and I's name against all of those things, and as we've kind of grown, we can then pull people into the different departments and areas of the business, as and when we hire new people, to kind of relinquish and delegate certain parts over to those new hires. It's a massive, HR and hiring is one of the biggest skill sets I think you need as a business owner if you do want to grow. I completely agree, with Jack about looking ahead and thinking about what do you want. I think it's quite sort of admirable, really, that Harry sort of said, I don't think I'll go past stage 2 of having 1 or 2 staff members, because that works for him. That's he doesn't want to grow a beast, have huge overheads, have huge responsibility, and people to kind of coordinate, and that's absolutely fine. So you need to figure out what you want from your business, from your life, and then kind of work back from there, really. Cool. We could probably go into that. We should spend so much time on that, but we're already sort of an hour and 10 minutes into this, so we need to start sort of wrapping up. But I've got one more question. It's from Jordan. Thanks for your messages earlier, Jordan, on Instagram. Multiple part question. Do you plan to hold any recently refurbished buy-to-let stock? Can't see the rationale to hold single refurbished buy-to-lets yielding 5% when interest rates are 5 to 6%. Even after getting all the principal investment out, there's still 25% equity, making no return. And this is a very, very good point. And Jack and I had this conversation this week with St Helens Mill, which is our block of 14 flats, predominantly on sort of individual single sort of AST buy-to-let type holdings. And when you look at the equity that we've got sat in it, it is making really, really poor return. We've got all of our original investment out. We've got over £1.2 million worth of equity sitting in that property, which is great, and that's the added value that we've built. But it generates less net income than some of our smaller assets, which have been far less work, far less headache, but generate more cash flow, but less equity in those deals. So I think it is way more difficult now to hold single buy-to-lets. That's why people do generally go and try to go up north where yields are far higher. Down in the south, you're looking at a bigger sort of capital appreciation and lower yields. You can still get high yields if you buy well and you can add value. And if you're running a HMO model or a service accommodation model where your yields are going to be higher, you can still achieve decent returns. But then that comes with a lot of cons in terms of more management, higher agency fees, more operational costs and things like that. So it is weighing up the balance is really where you want to be. But it's very, very difficult, I think, to hold buy-to-lets nowadays. Jack, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I don't think buy-to-lets are dead. I think they're more difficult for sure. We've actually got a buy-to-let in Central Suites, which is an absolute dreamboat of a deal. It's a 3-bedroom flat that we bought cheap, renovated slightly, rented high, refinanced higher, and it brings in 800 quid net per month just without any effort. It's actually been the same tenant in there for 3.5 years. So I do think there is a place, but that was purely brought to us, distressed seller. Yeah, we'll take that. It's kind of almost HMO yields, but our return on time is better because it's less management, less maintenance, less care going into that, less advertising, less viewings, etc. So I do think there is a place in it. I think it's very, very, very difficult to build a business purely on buy-to-lets. That business model, I think, is dead. But then I could see ourselves buying buy-to-lets in time to come.
Yeah. If those interest rates start to drop and you're looking at 4 or 5% and you're getting 6% yield, it's why we generally say down to the south as well, because we will get capital appreciation alongside a small amount of income on a cash flow basis.
I'm a massive southern believer in real estate. I think great, you can get an 8%, 9% gross yield, but I'm getting a 7 to 8% gross yield down here, and capital appreciation will outperform that. So if you play it for the long game, I think the wealth is built in the south generally. I'm talking about cash flow and profit and equity. So I'm a massive believer of the south, but I completely agree that holding. So we basically now, in the next sort of tranche of these 5 sites that Ben mentioned that we're on site of, we're selling everything apart from the higher cash flowing HMOs, higher yielding assets for that better cash flow. And some of them are really, really strong returns. So we completely, it's kind of like our business model is changing, because when we bought St Helens Mill, which Ben referred to, the interest rate we were going to get on that's 3.2%, which would be 90k net on a £3.5 million asset. Now it's 5% and it's 30k net on a £3.5 million asset, which is 1% net on its gross value, which is horrific. It's not really touching the sides. So I completely agree with that. But if we had adapted more of those to HMOs to combat that potential risk, that would have been a good idea. Maybe we can do that at next time or refi. Maybe we could have sold all the flats and just kept the one HMO. Maybe we could have sold the whole site. But you'd live and learn. And at the moment, we've learned and are hopefully implementing. We're selling more of the dry, vanilla income generating units, and we're holding sort of the higher cash flow revenue per value, which is predominantly HMOs. I don't even know how many HMO beds we're actually producing at the moment, Ben. I haven't even done that analysis, but it's 5 flat.
Yeah.
It's probably up there with like 40 beds, I would have thought.
Yeah, even on the old maltings, you are looking at 22 beds, I think, that we're
15,
holding.
15 along Hambra.
More
on the new sites. Yeah, probably upwards of 50 beds. So we're coincidentally generating about 2 million net sales value in the flats that are dry yields, and then also 50 HMO beds. So, and those 50 HMO beds are producing a good yield. So I definitely think that more, and this is kind of where I feel like there's a, stay tuned till the end because the best tip is there. This is where I feel the developers that do understand HMOs or service accommodation or interbreeding two strategies will perform, because the other developers that used to buy, build and rent stock, look at Ranjan Bhattacharya. He would buy a doer upper, shops and uppers. He wouldn't technically HMO them. I can't see that model working very well at the moment. So what does he do? He's got to deviate. He's got to sell more YouTube videos, or he's got to look at HMOs. And we're already in that HMO space, and that's where I feel like we actually should take advantage to this difficult market space for people that normally buy, build and hold. Stuart Wyeth, another example. He was always like, "Oh, I'm going to hold everything. I'm going to hold everything." And the other day, he was like, "Yeah, I'm going to sell most of it." I was like, "Oh, what's happened, Stu?"
The yield's just not there, is it? The returns just aren't there. But good question. Thanks very much, Jordan. That's been amazing. We're looking for more questions like that to really challenge us. But yeah, it's been really good to speak this Friday afternoon. We'll see you again next Friday, and have a great weekend, everyone. Speak to you soon. Cheers.
I'm going to go watch Mary Berry turn on Henley.